Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Rob. I'm an attorney from Massachusetts. And today let's talk about the truth about the Fourth Amendment and the raid Florida. We have a lot to talk about today. There's a lot in the news. There's a lot of news and articles. There's a lot on Twitter. There's a lot on all the social networks. So let me start off by saying I am a man, and this video is offered for entertainment purposes only. It isn't for legal advice. If you have a legal problem, make sure that you consult with an attorney in person so that you can get it by saying this video. Again, it's just for entertainment purposes only. I am on Twitter if you'd like to follow me. It's the page is right up here. And let's get right into this video. First, let's talk about the Fourth Amendment. Secondly, let me preface this video by saying I've done one or two live videos before, and this is like my third live video for a while. So if there's any technical difficulties, please be patient and I'll get right to it. And I'll get right to this video. But let's take a look at the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment is one of my favorites. It was one of my favorites in law school. And for good reason, because it can apply to a lot of the things that happen in life with the police and with maybe even people that we know. We see videos about it on the news, and it's really an important basic legal right. And the thing about constitutional rights, the thing about the Constitution, the thing about laws is, and it's fine for something to be written on paper, but the real trick is being able to enforce this right. And we can see what happened to President Trump during the Mar-a-Lago raid that the FBI conducted. If something like that can happen to a former president, what does that mean for you or I? They don't have anywhere near the clout that the former president of the United States has. So let's take a look at this, what the Fourth Amendment says. The right of the people to be secure in their person, houses, papers, and effects shall not be violated. Against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. No warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or things to be searched, seized. So we have a lot to talk about just in that particular one tiny Fourth Amendment phrase. It's packed, there's thousands and thousands of cases that have been talked about and decided regarding the Fourth Amendment. So let's get into it, but I want to give you an opportunity to see that most every other state, if not every other state, every state, every other state has their own constitution and their own version of the Fourth Amendment. In Massachusetts, we have our own version of the Fourth Amendment, which offers the citizen care a little more rights, believe it or not, than is contained in the Fourth Amendment. My interpretation of it anyway. So there's been a lot of action regarding Trump on Twitter. There's a lot of tweets that have been sent out recently. And let's take a quick look at some of them. And I thought that this was kind of interesting, this report, that breaking report, Eric Trump drops bombs as he'll release the FBI surveillance tapes. That will be something if he does that. And there's a lot of tweets here, so let's just kind of take a quick look at some of them. Get this going here. Anyway, as I said before, this Florida rolls out "Don't Tread on Me" license plate that caused a lot of that caused a lot of controversy, I guess. Not necessarily with me, but a lot of people were up in arms. I read about anyway today. This is Donald Trump, and I just want to get down a little further underneath here. If you just give me a little bit. Here we go. Here we go. Breaking report: Trump demands Reinhardt recuse himself from the Mar-a-Lago FBI raid hearing. We'll get to this later in the video, but for somebody to get a search warrant, Alan Dershowitz, he's a professor, and he claims to be an expert on the Fourth Amendment, and he is an expert on the Fourth Amendment, says that pretty much whoever, when a government entity petitions the court to get a search warrant, it isn't that difficult for a person, for the FBI or law enforcement, to get a search warrant. And that's kind of a scary thing. Okay. Let's just go down just a little further on this and see what we can say. Look here. Federal court hearing set for August 18th to consider motion to release the Trump raid affidavit. Now that's kind of interesting because I was just reading about that woman from OnlyFans who was arrested. There's a warrant out anyway for her arrest. She allegedly was involved in an altercation with a boyfriend, and the boyfriend was stabbed, and she's being charged with a crime regarding that murder. So that affidavit, as far as I could tell, was released. And I know the FBI is saying that they don't want to release the information in the affidavit because it would compromise their ongoing criminal investigation. We've heard, you and I think everybody has heard that in the past about people trying to get these affidavits public, and the FBI or law enforcement isn't cooperating with the making it public. What's going on here? Insane. I would like to know from all of you whether or not you opposed the Trump raid. The FBI raided the Trump home in Mar-a-Lago. Trump is demanding the immediate release of unredacted the FBI affidavit. So I think we'd all like to see what was in that affidavit, what gave the FBI the cause to basically go into Trump's residence with 30 armed FBI agents, kind of rummaging through his private property to get supposedly documents that were classified. He was president of the United States, and it sets a bad precedent. Let's say Biden leaves office and he's a private citizen, or let's say he's just thinking right now, if Trump can get arrested or if the FBI can raid Trump's residence, what are they going to do to me when I leave office? If a Republican gets into office, it would have to, it sets a bad precedent for any president that might be in the crosshairs of another political party. This isn't a Democrat or Republican issue. It's a nonpartisan issue about the FBI possibly becoming politicized. We'll see what the FBI affidavit says, because I think eventually it will be released. I don't know how soon it will be, but eventually it will be released. So let's get to this story about the Department of Justice opposing the release of Trump raid affidavit, but they're willing to unseal other documents. We talked a little bit about this, and it's kind of interesting because in other situations, the law enforcement would actually release some of this information in this situation than not releasing this information. Let's take a look at this story, let's dive into it. And it is interesting how you'll notice certain agencies might be more cooperative than other agencies, and the Department of Justice is not cooperating like we might expect in some other situation. But the Department of Justice said on Monday, now the Department of Justice is the overall agency that's in charge of the FBI. So common sense, we can imply pretty much that the head of the Department of Justice knew that this raid was going to take place before it took place, because the FBI is under the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice. So the Department of Justice said on Monday it opposes the release of the FBI affidavit used to justify the search of President Trump's Florida residence last week, but added that it's willing to release less descriptive documents. When you're playing with fire, I suppose you have to expect a little fire in return. It's only common sense. So the FBI, the Department of Justice, must have known that this raid was going to cause a firestorm of controversy, and that people were going to be asking for the affidavit. Maybe they did. Maybe they thought that everybody would roll over and say that, and Trump would say, well, I don't want to release it. It's personal information. But that didn't happen. And sometimes information can be used as a sword or as a defense mechanism. But in this situation, Trump obviously wants to use it to his advantage, and is using it to his advantage, because it seems by the way he's acting, he has nothing to hide. I don't think really that he does have anything to hide. And there were less intrusive alternatives to the FBI making a raid on a private residence of a former president. They could have subpoenaed the information in, and they didn't. They could have asked President Trump for the information. Who knows if they did, or who knows if they didn't? We don't know. But it looks like they didn't try to subpoena the information. Trump was in New York, not in Florida. So he wouldn't have had the opportunity to dispose of the information personally anyway, if the FBI tried to subpoena the information into court. But that wasn't done. The way it was done ignited a storm of controversy. And I don't think personally it was the way for the FBI to do it in this particular situation. The Department of Justice said in a footnote that the release of even a redacted version of the affidavit would not serve any public interest due to the number of details that would have to be omitted. Well, again, that doesn't seem like the American way when you raid a former president's home and you're not willing to let the public or even Trump know the reasons for the particular raid. There has to be, like in this situation, it can't be something ordinary. It can't be vanilla. It has to be something extraordinary that would justify a raid of a former president. And the FBI is saying we don't feel comfortable releasing the information, but they felt comfortable enough apparently bringing 30 armed FBI agents to former president's personal residence. I mean, if you're going to play with the big boys, I think you have to expect that you're going to have to provide some information that you might not normally provide in a situation that a normal FBI agent might find themselves in. But in this situation, they didn't find themselves in that situation. So let's take a closer look at this if we could. See if there's anything else we want to talk about. As the court is aware from its review of the affidavit, it contains, among other critically important and detailed investigative facts, highly sensitive information about witnesses, including witnesses interviewed by the government, specific investigative techniques, and information required by law to be kept under seal. Again, the FBI was the one who did the raid. They have an obligation to the American people to justify why they raided a resident of a former president, or any raid for that matter. They can get away, if a law enforcement agency can get away under the Fourth Amendment with raiding a former president's residence, what's going to happen to the average man or woman whose private residence is raided in the middle of the night by any law enforcement agency? Doesn't this set a precedent for law enforcement to kind of think to themselves, well, we have a lot of leeway in this. If the court, if the FBI isn't made to reveal this information, we probably won't be made to reveal it either. I mean, that's a line of reasoning that could be used. I'm not sure if it will, but that is a line of reasoning that possibly could be used. So one of the other issues that this statement raises is who informed the FBI about these documents in the Trump, about these alleged documents in the Trump residence? Was it somebody that was close to Trump? Was it some reporter? Was it a maid or a groundskeeper at Mar-a-Lago? Somebody had to inform the FBI of the allegations that were made in this affidavit. And it says highly sensitive information about witnesses. Were witnesses paid off? Were they given immunity? Were they, who knows? But it says highly sensitive information about the witnesses. They want to keep the witnesses quiet, and that's really not the American way to subject an American citizen to secretive courts and secretive information, even if it's highly sensitive. It's highly sensitive. You know, we have, what is it called? Secret courts in the United States for terrorism. I was never a big fan of any secret court. It seems to me it's pretty dystopian to have a secretive court anywhere, whether it's for terrorism or any other issue that might come up. Let's get on to this article just a little bit and see if there's any more information that we can discuss in here. Down just a little bit further, there's a picture of President Trump, and there's a picture of the Mar-a-Lago residence that I think that we're all familiar with. Let's take a quick look and see what else it says. In addition, information about witnesses is particularly sensitive given the high-profile nature of this matter and the risks that the revelation of witnesses' identities would impact their willingness to cooperate with the investigation. If these witnesses wouldn't cooperate with the investigation because their identities were made public, what kind of witnesses are they? How reliable is their information if they're not willing to stand behind what they say? I mean, that's one of the bedrocks of law, isn't it? I mean, if somebody goes into court, a defendant has the right to cross-examine witnesses against them. I understand that this case isn't in court now, but eventually these witnesses will probably have to come forward and testify if this matter ever gets any further than it is right now. And I hope, as an American citizen, that it doesn't. Let's see, what else can we get from this? The Justice Department would be willing to release other documents, including cover sheets, the initial search warrant application, the government's motion to seal the warrant, and the sealing order issued by U.S. Magistrate Bruce Reinhardt. The unprecedented August 8th raid on the Mar-a-Lago resort was related to Trump's possible mishandling of classified documents, according to court records unsealed Friday. Now, there seems to be some disconnect, some sort of disconnect, because President Trump had access to all this information when he was president. I think we can agree to that. He must have known what was in the documents. So what was the national security problem with him having access to documents that he previously had access to and presumably already read? I know there's some regulation, I think it's, I can't even remember the name of the regulation, that prohibits former presidents from taking classified information back to their personal residence, and they're supposed to bring it to, is it the Library of Congress? Can't remember off the top of my head. But there's no criminal penalties to that regulation. There are. I'm sure the FBI could come up with something as far as criminal penalties are concerned, but we have to wonder why all this drama over a former president bringing information or having information, if he did in fact have information that was at his private residence. There doesn't seem to be any indication right now that was seen by anybody else, by any, including President Trump himself. So let's take a quick look at, see what this says. Trump said Friday that he wants all documents pertaining to raid to be released. I won't say that. The conservative legal group, Judicial Watch, and nearly a dozen other news outlets are seeking the release of documents related to the search. The request is being considered by the U.S. District Court for Southern Florida. That's the man, Bruce Reinhardt, judge magistrate, which I'm not sure what how fair of a process that could be when he's being asked to rule on a search warrant that he issued. I heard, he probably heard the same thing, that he's getting a lot of grief on social media for issuing the search warrant to begin with. And again, I guess if you're playing with fire, you have to kind of expect a little fire in return, unfortunately. Not only will I oppose the release of documents related to the un-American, unwarranted, not only will I not oppose, there's a double negative right there by former President Trump, not only will I not oppose the release of documents related to the un-American, unwarranted, and unnecessary. There's a lot of negative words here. Not negative in the sense bad, but negative if they have the word no in them, or they apply the word no in them. Raid and break-in of my home in Palm Beach, Florida, Mar-a-Lago. I'm going a step further by encouraging the immediate release of these documents, even though they've been drawn up by radical left Democrats and possible future political opponents who have a strong and powerful vested interest in attacking me. He has a point, and that's exactly what the FBI shouldn't be doing at this point. I mean, the presidential election is coming right up. What was their incentive for doing it at this point in time? It raises a lot of issues. It raises a lot of red flags. And for Republicans, obviously, it raises some issues, some red flags. And for Democrats, I mean, at the back of your mind, at the back of people who are Democrats, in the back of a Democrat's mind, they might be wondering the same thing. Why now? I mean, isn't there easier ways? The American way is elections. If Trump has the opportunity to run for president and people feel that he broke some law, did something underhanded, then his opponent would have the opportunity to raise that issue during the campaign. And other Republicans would have the ability to raise that issue against him during any campaign, any primary campaign against former President Trump. The FBI shouldn't be the organization raising these issues at this point in time. The Justice Department is investigating whether Trump broke 3 laws pertaining to the custody of government records, including the Espionage Act of 1917, according to court documents released Friday. I'm an appellate attorney and I write legal briefs, and usually I don't cite back to briefs that were, I don't cite back to case law or laws that was enacted more than 100 years ago. So that's when I see some reference to law that was passed, could say, over 100 years ago, that we have to think, does it really have a lot of relevance to the law right today? Trump claims that he disclassified any records stored at his residence and argued that some records may now be protected by attorney-client privilege. Trump alleged Monday that FBI's agents stole my 3 passports when expired during the raid. Why did the FBI have to steal it, take or seize, I should say, I have to use my words carefully, seize his passports? I'm sure if he wanted to leave the country as a former president, he could find a way to leave the country in one of his private jets. So it doesn't seem to be a whole big issue to take passports in an effort to possibly stop him from leaving the country. In addition to reviewing Trump's handling of documents, the Justice Department is investigating the ex-president's actions to challenge his 2020 election loss, including by floating the selection of rival states of electors from swing states. So that's that article, and it's kind of interesting to see that. We can go here to this article on Ellen Dershowitz was interviewed by Glenn Beck. I haven't really seen him in quite a long time. Maybe you have, but the headline to this is why this legal expert says FBI's Trump raid is outrageous. Now you'll see in this article that Ellen Dershowitz is a professor of law at Harvard University, an expert in Fourth Amendment cases, and that he is a Democrat. And he is saying that in this article that he thinks Democrats, Republicans, and independents should be outraged at the FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago. Let's take a little look at this right now. This, you can see it a little bit better. Outrageous and unconstitutional is how lawyer Ellen Dershowitz described the FBI recent raid of Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. A legal expert and host of Dershowitz show says he may have more experience with the Fourth Amendment than any other academic in America. It's a pretty bold claim. In his discussion, he discusses the questions the government must answer about the raid, why Trump should have been served a subpoena instead, and why even Democrats should be upset. We talked about the fact that he should have been served a subpoena before he was. Sit here a little bit better so you can see it easier. Tell me about the raid with Donald Trump. So let's take a look at this. I won't go into this whole article. We'll read a little bit. Ellen says you don't engage in a raid on a house unless you have exhausted all other possibilities. I agree with that. We're talking about, I don't care if he's a former president, the barber or the hairdresser you go to every week. We all deserve to be secure in our houses and not have to worry about the police or other law enforcement or the FBI or the CIA or the Department of Defense or any government agency, police from coming into our home and taking a look to see what's inside of it because of any old reason. If there's other ways to get that information, those should be exhausted first, and they weren't exhausted because, as we can see, Alan Dershowitz says the most obvious recourse here was a subpoena for the president saying there are 25 boxes in your house, there's a safe. We'd like you to bring them all to the court tomorrow morning before you have a chance to leave where you are in the Northeast and come there and destroy anything, and we'll submit them to a judge. So what he's saying is the FBI could have issued a subpoena, and not only that, why does the FBI get to see classified information if it was classified information? Do they have any more of a right to see classified information than a former president? And he had, as president, he had to have had the highest security clearance possible. How about these FBI agents? What were their security clearance? And why and how do they get to see classified documents and read through those classified documents when they possibly shouldn't be doing so? Shouldn't they have brought that information to the judge? And it should have been a judge, not a judge magistrate, but a federal judge looking at these documents that has a highly classified security clearance, looking at these documents to determine what documents should be even seen by the FBI in the first place. So Ellen says that by a judge, not the FBI coming in and sweeping everything together, breaking into a safe, reminds me of the Geraldo Rivera fiasco, where he jumped into the safe, one of the big gangsters. Some of this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but let's take a look down where the second here. So, I mean, if you have anything you would like to say it in the comments. I'd be happy to answer any of your. Just take a look because I'm broadcasting this to another channel. I'm going to take a look. We don't know. I see comment here by why does Trump need top secret security? Why does Trump need top secret nuclear? I don't really know, and none of us really know what he has in his home. As far as I know, and I'm only going on my personal knowledge, is that the President of the United States, which the nuclear goes in him all along. I don't think that Trump would have anything to do with launching a nuclear strike if that's what I'm implying way where. But it's a good question. I'm a friend of both Sandy Berger, who was the former national security advisor of the late Sandy Berger, and a friend of Hillary Clinton when they were accused of what was exactly comparable, and there was no searches of their houses. People have been found guilty of taking classified material improperly have been given fines. I don't think there's been a search like this based on allegations made in this case. Now, don't rush to judgment. Maybe there is something there. Right now, the burden of proof is heavily on the Justice Department and the FBI, they have to justify what's been done. Absent the justification, most Americans will not believe that this was necessary. And they're going to come back and say, oh, the FBI, Alan Dershowitz is saying, the FBI is going to come back and say, oh, we can't discuss it. And that's exactly what they're saying. And I've seen this a million times in different cases, that when it's convenient, the government agency is going to say, it's classified, we can't discuss it. It will come out maybe sometime in the future, but right now the American people don't have a right to know this. But again, it could happen to anybody. And it could happen to a former president of the United States. Can it happen to you or me? And the answer is, if it can happen to him, yes, it could happen to you or I. He said classified material nonsense. Appoint a special magistrate with security clearance who can objectively look through this thing, or else appoint the congressional committee, a real committee. So he has some points there, and I won't get into all of it. And I just want to look at this article tonight. I thought it was a pretty interesting article about the raid on Trump, and it's a double tragedy. And it says that irony surrounds us, it piles up like leaves in the fall. The core of our Fourth Amendment is protection of individuals from government overreach for political or religious reasons, and that's true. And to avert political vendettas, the right of people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. And that's the Fourth Amendment. At that time, I think this article is insinuating that the founders of the country were animated, agitated, and clear at this point that they didn't want future generations to have to go through what they went through with the British authorities at that time, breaking into residence at will, taking informations, trial of juries. We don't want that at this point in this country either. My opinion, anyway. I don't want it personally. Let's take a look a little further down. This up so you can see it. The founders' concern was that everyday citizens, let alone opposition, political and religious leaders, might be one day face an all-powerful government willing to prevent, persecute opponents. And that's what Trump supporters, and that's what Trump is arguing. I mean, if it looks like one and shakes like one and smells like one, it usually is one. So you tell me. The founders are concerned about everyday citizens. It sounds unlikely. This sounds unlikely. Consults history, and we know what history shows us. Very specifically, people in the 1700s feared the general warrant used against colonials by a tyrannical king, so offensive that by the mid-1800s, even the British threw it out. And I did a video a long time ago about that, and it's interesting to see the similarities. I mean, if you look at the United States Constitution, it's basically, a lot of it is based on the difficulties that the people in the 1700s had to endure from the British government at the time. British then insisted on specifics and accountability, which that's what we want in this country, is for our government to be accountable to us and not the other way around. We shouldn't have to be accountable to the government. And after all, the government is there to help. It's supposed to be there to help us, to serve justice, to provide common defense. It's not there to harass citizens. It's not there, in my opinion, to hire 87,000 new IRS agents. It's there to help everyday citizens out, so it will make our lives as citizens a little bit easier, because let's face it, sometimes it's difficult to, this is a difficult life. Given the Fourth Amendment origins, history, and purposes, ask yourself several questions, this article says. Let's take a look a little further down. Can in view of the reasonable expectations of privacy, was there a less intrusive way for setting up an exchange of information, document production, avoiding a slow power against it? So what they're saying is basically what Alan Dershowitz is saying: if there was a less intrusive alternative than searching a former president's house, then why wasn't it done? Was the invasive search necessarily even based on crimes alleged, which focused on document handling? Was the warrant application drafted with specificity? Did it state exactly what documents were sought, where they were to be found, what was required? Did it authorize a general search as barred by the Fourth Amendment? We don't know that because we haven't seen the actual affidavit right now. And Trump wants to see it, and I'd like to see it myself. And I'm sure you would too. Consider also who is to be searched: the former U.S. president from the opposing party, a vocal political opponent, past, currently, and in the future, someone formally, falsely accused and vindicated, accused again and summarily impeached without regular or due process. This is what this article said. If you were President Biden or the Attorney General or the FBI Director, all of whom had to know about this, would you get sign off from a junior magistrate, open Trump critic, or take another course? And this severely divided political climate, what do you think? What would you think? Would you not think perception? He has a point. As we talked about earlier in this video, they had to think as smart individuals. They had to have something going through their mind saying, what is going to happen after we do this? What is the reaction going to be? And see what the reaction is. And it's kind of a polarization, again, like a lot of things that happen. I want to get down toward the end of this article and see. So this article is saying, first, the art of political vendetta has hit a new low. Precedent likely to reappear, right? To most, this just seems more evidence of one party is misusing the justice system against the other. That said, this is new. The federal government has enormous coercive power, which can be dangerous in irresponsible hands. Lord Acton wrote, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolute." Such stark action, barring something unthinkable, is tragedy number one, according to this article. Tragedy number two goes beyond national politics. It's personal. This event shakes the foundation of the republic. If an unreasonable search and seizure can be executed on a flawed warrant with no accountability against a major political figure, what does the Fourth Amendment mean? And we talked about this earlier, and the author of this article has a point. This kind of political theory is more than embarrassing. It undermines historic understanding of infidelity to our Fourth Amendment. It undermines public trust in our government. This was not run-of-the-mill. This act was without precedent. If this can be done to a president, to whom can it not be done? I want to know your thoughts in the comments. Let me know. If you're watching this on a replay, I'd like to know your thoughts. Sound off in the comments. My name is Rob. I have a YouTube channel here, obviously. I'd love it if you would subscribe. I'd love to hang out with you more often. I want to thank you for watching this video. If you're watching it on a replay, I really appreciate all of you that have watched it and everyone who watches it on replay in the future. Thank you so much, and I wish all of you a very good afternoon.